Welcome to my webinar today. I'm going to be interviewing Ron Carucci. My name's JannFreed. You can call me Dr. Jann, and this is all part of our virtual Leadership Legacy Summit that will be released in June. I'm honored to introduce Ron. Ron is co-founder and managing partner of Navalent, working with CEOs and executives pursuing transformational change for their organizations, leaders, and industries. He has a 30-year track record helping some of the world's most influential executives tackle challenges of strategy, organization, and leadership. He has worked with all sizes of companies in more than 25 countries on 4 continents. In addition to being a regular contributor to Harvard Business Review and Forbes, he has been featured in Fortune, CEO Magazine, Business Insider, MSNBC, Inc., Business Week, and Smart Business. And let me just say that I love Ron's bio on his website titled The Whole Me. It's fun, it's creative, it's informative, and it reflects what I've seen of Ron on a few recent webinars, one on LinkedIn in particular. So I'm honored to have a chance to interview Ron for this Leadership Legacy Summit. Well, welcome, Ron.
Jann, it's great to be with you. Thanks for having me.
Well, I'm really honored. And I will just start off, again, my interest here is leadership, and I watched your TED Talk and I was very impressed with your message. Share with us the 4 characteristics of a successful leader.
So, that TED Talk was, I broadened the research on influence, but it was based on our 10-year longitudinal study we did for my last book called Rising to Power. More than 27, that half of them fail in the first 18 months. And that seemed odd to me that we've accepted that as a normal course of life, because that means we're throwing careers away, we're ditching families, we're rolling the dice on people's careers in ways that we shouldn't be. So why was that okay? So we wanted to find out. So we dug in and come to find out that we've been putting these landmines in people's ways forever. We've been causing leaders to derail, consistently for 20 years. The great part about the research is that we were able to uncover all the rocks and all the things they're stumbling on and help figure out what will help them rise up and thrive at a new altitude. But the other half of the research we asked the question of was, what are the other half doing? If half the people are sticking the landing once they rise up there, how are they doing it? And we found that there were 4 consistent patterns that set those influential leaders apart. The hard part about the research was no matter how we cut the data up statistically, these 4 patterns wind up at the top of the list. They didn't always wind up in the same order of priority. But what that meant was that if you had 3 of them, you would still be in the failure group. So what the data said was it's all or nothing. And I had the research team do 99 different regression analyses because I didn't want to have to say that. I didn't want to have to say it's all or nothing.
Right.
The positive news was you can learn them. They're not things that are a result of some mysterious genetic misformation, right? You could learn them. They are. First one we called context. Context, these are the leaders that are curious. They're the leaders that want to understand why is this a certain way? What is happening? They understand what's happening around them as influential forces in their industry, in their technology, in their competitive set. And they ask why questions before they have answers. They understand that they have to adapt their behavior and their answers before they can impose them. In other words, you can't just show up with, I have the answer to a question you may not be asking. I have to adapt my ideas just enough to be credible in a new environment. So they can read the context, they can read the tea leaves because they're curious. The second was breadth. So organizations, as they grow, they naturally fragment, right? So we all know what silos are. We all know what seams are. We all know that there's lots of little pieces of organizations that bump into each other and struggle to get along. But as you get higher and more influential in organizations, you have to stitch the seams together. You have to bring the pieces into a more cohesive whole. Many leaders, because they rise up in a certain silo, they don't realize the biases they arrive with. So if you grew up in marketing, you see the world through consumers. If you grew up in finance, you see the world economically. If you grew up in operations, you see the world through cost. And you don't have that luxury in an influential role. You have to go from being first chair to conductor and making the pieces sing together as a whole. Breadth means you can build bridges. It means you can stitch the seams together and help people understand that where they intersect between sales and marketing or between operations and R&D, that's where value gets created. And leaders know how to create the breadth into a whole. Third one was choice. So these leaders were the ones that could make hard decisions. They had decision-making apparatus that were, whatever it was there, what part of was intuition, what part was data, what part was other voices. They could blend those into a well-constructed choice. And they weren't afraid to say no. Many leaders arrive into hard decision-making roles where they have more power and are more inclined to not use that power because they're afraid of it. Instead, they purchase loyalty, they purchase popularity, they'll dole out way too many yeses to please people and dilute the resources of the organization and the focus of the organization. These leaders could say no. They were not afraid to disappoint people. Like Ron Heifetz says, leadership is the ability to disappoint people at a rate they can absorb. They could narrow the focus to just a few priorities so that they could actually deliver on the commitments they made. And lastly was connection. These were the leaders. Every company has them. We've all seen them. Everybody wants to work for them. They're smart. They're kind. You know, if you're in their presence, you're going to learn. They're good-hearted. You trust their integrity. And the relationships they had with people, whether it was their above them, peers, or below them, were incredibly full of high regard. And the interesting thing about this set of leaders was they prioritized their stakeholders not by who they needed something from, but who they could help succeed. They focused more on the people they could help and enable, not the people they could get something from. And so when it came time to creating and leveraging their network of people, they had the instant support of the entire organization. So context, breadth, choice, connection. All learnable. The time to start learning them is yesterday. But it's all four that set those leaders apart.
Yeah, I love that. And I totally believe it. The last one I find so interesting, focused on helping others.
Well, I think we all have impulses that cause us to reflexively reach for what we need.
Right.
And so we prioritize people for, can they politically hurt me or politically help me? What do I need from them? What information do they have? And when you get to the top of an organization, you have to remember, your life's on a jumbotron, right? You're in a fishbowl. Everybody's watching you. You have a megaphone strapped to your mouth 24/7, and everything you say is amplified. If you're playing those games, everybody knows it. You can't hide it.
Right.
We all know in Adam Grant's language, takers, when we see them, even when they're disguised as givers. And those leaders are short-lived. They don't last.
Yeah. Well, that's I love that. That's a great, and you're very good with metaphors too. I love that. So can you share a story for how you see these characteristics or lack of playing out? Some stories, some specifics.
Gosh, I've got many clients who I think emulate them all. So one guy, he's actually in the book Rising to Power. He's the case study for connection. His name is Mike Smith, and he's a brilliant leader. He's well regarded and loved by his people. And he in the beginning of his career started out asking people three questions that he asked everybody. He asked, what can I do to be a better colleague to you? He really wanted to know. Then he'd ask, what are you working on these days that's really, really important to you? And then he'd ask, what can I do to help you with that really important thing? And over time, he got great feedback and learned a lot about how others saw him. But because people knew to expect those questions and they knew he meant them, people started emulating them. Right? So when you become that kind of a leader, people want to copy you. They want to emulate you. Naturally, when he was working on something that was really important, people wanted to support him.
That's a great example. It kind of reminds me, I don't know if you read the book, it was a short little book by Matthew Kelly, I think, called Dream Manager.
I think I read it, yeah. It was one called The Dream Boss.
Yeah, I think, well, this is the Dream Manager, and he trains people in how to be these dream managers. And the whole idea is, to learn the dreams of your employees.
Yeah.
find out, and then how can you help them reach their dreams?
Yep.
How can their job help them reach their dreams? So, no, I love that. That's excellent. Well, let's shift a little bit into current times here, because this summit will be released in June. So let's talk about leadership during this pandemic. How has this time influenced your thinking about leadership in general, or successful leadership, or how leadership might change?
Are you guys going to be editing this at all?
A little
Will you
bit.
be editing the video?
Yes.
Marie, can you put it on pause for a second?
Oh, sorry.
Jann, I think that there are so many ways that COVID has changed the world that we don't see yet.
Okay.
I think all the people trying to predict all that's going to stay, I think, are foolish. It's a fool's errand to try and understand what a precedent like this is going to mean for the world. I do think, however, on the upside, the amount of compassionate humanity we have seen, not from government leaders, but from everybody else, I do hope that's here to stay. I've done a couple of pieces on preparing to return to the office and all the anxiety that comes with that. I think one of the characteristics leaders have been forced to learn is vulnerability. The leaders who try to look like they were in control, have all the answers, be the perfect air traffic controller to all the unknowns, probably died early in the track in like week 4. The leaders who figured out that it was perfectly okay not to have the answers, to say, I don't know, I'll find out, and who could learn to read beneath the anxious questions when an employee is like tense and at their edge, asking, are we getting our stimulus package? What they're really asking is, am I going to be okay? What can I trust you for? And if you learn to read beneath the questions to the question they were asking, you won their regard, even if the question didn't have an answer.
Right.
And so I think leaders have been forced into crash courses in empathy, compassion, and vulnerability in ways they hadn't before. If you took the opportunity to let the crisis bring those out of you, you did really well. And of course, the best advice is don't put them back on the shelf when the crisis is over.
Right.
Because those were such vitally important characteristics to help your people through this time. There are some companies that made the unfortunate choices to end up on the wrong side of history in this. And when this is over, history is not going to be kind to them, and neither is the consumer market. I think those companies that chose to do well by their people, as best as they could, whether they had the money or not, I think the market will be kind to them, and their people will be forgiving of them.
Yeah. No, I think that's really excellent. And one area that I talk a lot about is how leaders need to understand coping mechanisms. A lot of things are dying. A lot of things are changing. And industries, companies, jobs. So, no, I think that's excellent. So in addition to that, Ron, compassion, empathy, vulnerability, what other advice would you give to leaders right now?
Well, I think, we've known for a long time that leadership is a set apart capability for organizations. We've been talking about the importance of investing in it, but when you look where the dollars go, they don't get invested in. If we know that the top, and I'm not saying first line leaders or middle managers shouldn't get invested in, but we know that the top, 20% of our leaders have a disproportionate impact on the future and performance of the organization. Yet that's where we invest the least. We think executive coaching is when you need to fix somebody.
Right.
One of the most astounding findings in our Rising to Power study was how many executives arrived into senior level jobs and the pipeline of help stopped, as if you were fully baked and now you'd arrived, and so you didn't need any more help. I mean, it's lunacy. And so we've got to start recognizing that pool of leaders that you are entrusting the future of your organizations to needs disproportionately higher levels of investment. And why wouldn't you want to have them, if you want them to take the reins of your company to the future, why would you not want to make sure they had everything they possibly needed to do it?
Absolutely. Well, you just mentioned this Rising to Power, and I know you have a recent book contract. So tell us about the book.
So Rising to Power is our last book. I forget what, 2015, or I forget what the year was. That was our 10-year study. And that's basically our blueprint for, as you rise in organizations, what is the path to succeed? How do you stick the landing? How do you not become another statistic on the pile of failed transitions? It was heartening to write that book because it was personal. As you watched him at TED Talk, it started with a phone call from a leader saying, "I've been fired." That a leader who was labeled by every metric a high potential future leader. So it was deeply disheartening for me to see him derail. So we went back to the same database 2 years ago at the 15-year mark. So now instead of 2,700 interviews, we had 3,300 interviews. And we wanted to find out, so we isolated last time for individual behavior. I wanted to understand, what would the data tell us about systemic behavior? What could we learn about organizations as systems and how they shape the choices of leaders in the organization? And what we uncovered were 4 fairly scary but remarkable patterns that predict whether or not people will lie and be dishonest.
Really?
Okay. We isolated for what we called honesty, justice, and purpose. We all know that today everybody's purpose washing. Purpose is a new fad, like innovation. Everybody's supposed to have purpose. We all want everybody knows we all want meaning in the workplace. So now the goal is to make it look like you have purpose. So we're all trying to look like there's some greater cause we're serving, and people are going to see right through it. We have all the D&I folks trying to get after equality with a campaign. You can't campaign your way to equality. Justice is a factor of fairness, and it's a factor of equity and accountability. It's not a factor of telling people to be nice to people. All for the diversity and inclusion people, love them to death, but if they really want to make just organizations, they're going to have to dig a little bit deeper than a campaign. And we have all the behavioral scientists telling us how to be psychologically safe enough to have people speak the truth. Well, what our research found was that justice, honesty, and purpose are one thing. You can't have one without the other two. And until we create systems that allow us to create whole, honest, and just organizations, there's no purpose to live for. Nobody wants to live for a purpose in an environment that feels duplicitous. So the 4 findings were what we call, one was strategic identity, meaning if you are who you say you are, you make a promise in a brand, you make a promise in a mission, you make a promise in a set of values. If to the people you serve and to the people you employ, you are who you say you are 3 times more likely to have people be honest and tell the truth and be just. But if you are not who you say you are, if your actions and your words don't match, and how many times, Jann, have you seen somebody look at a mission statement and roll their eyes?
Absolutely, yes, I know what you're talking about.
If that's who you are 3 times more likely to have people lie and withhold the truth and behave unfairly. Accountability. If there's no justice in your accountability, meaning how people believe their contributions were measured was fair, not rewarded, but measured. In other words, I believe you see me. You are 4 times more likely to have people be honest and fair. But if I think that the yardstick you're holding up to me is not fair, not just, or it's inaccurate, and I have to now embellish my accomplishments and hide my mistakes, you're 4 times more likely to have people lie, withhold the truth, and take.
Wow.
Because when people feel wronged, they feel entitled to take. They will get their pound of flesh some way. Governance. If your governance is earmarked by transparency, meaning I trust the information I get, the decisions I believe you're making are based on criteria I trust, and I can get information that I need to make decisions, you're 3.5 times more likely to have people be honest and be just. But if the rumor mill is the most reliable source of information, if I have to go underground to get things, or if I go into meetings and it's faux inclusion, meaning, we're here to solve a problem that I realize you've already solved, or we're here to make a decision that's really you've already made, and this is all orchestrated theater, now you're 3.5 times more likely to have people lie and distort the truth. Because if I have to make it up, I'll make it up.
Right.
And lastly, cross-functional this was a surprise to us. Cross-functional collaboration, the seams we talked about earlier.
Right.
If you have border wars, if you have the classic unresolved rivalries between key aspects of your organization, you are 6 times more likely to have people lie or withhold the truth. Because if we fragment the organization, now we have dueling truths, which means it's no longer about the truth, it's about my truth versus your truth, which means my goal is to win. But if you have unity across the units, if you have integration and cohesion, now you're 6 times more likely to have people be straightforward, honest, and liberally share information and be fair. The interesting thing is that the statistical models are cumulative. So if you have coherence between who you say are and what you do, if your accountability is fair, if your governance is transparent, and if your organization is cohesive, you are 16 times more likely to have an organization that people tell you the truth, tell you what's hard to hear, and treat each other fairly and equally. But if all 4 of those things don't apply to you, you are 16 times more likely to wind up on the headline of a New York Times story you never wanted to be in. And the ethical fungus is growing in that petri dish now.
Yeah, that is amazing. When will this book be out, Ron?
Spring of 2021.
Okay, perfect. Well, that's kind of, a year, so that's great. Wonderful. Wow. Well, okay, so I want to ask you some questions that I'm real interested in for my work, and that's kind of legacy. How do you define legacy, and what does it mean to you, even when you hear the word?
I think a lot of the leaders are trying to legacy wash too. It's a word. I think it's lost its nobility. It is a very honorable word, and I see it most used in the form of regret. When I coach executives who are exiting the workplace, and they're looking back on their what they're proud of, and it's just an accumulated pile of unfinished business, carnage in relationships, and regret. And at that point there's no do-over, right? And so when I coach leaders in their mid to late 40s, I tell them, you got 2 moves left before you exit the workplace. What do you want those 2 moves to mean so that your fingerprint on the world is one you're proud of? And most of them have no idea. They've not given a thought to how do they want to leave, what do they want to leave behind? I think each of us will leave a fingerprint on the world in some form.
Right.
You should be deciding now if it's a dark, smudgy, bludgeoned fingerprint, or it's one you'd be proud to have people emulate.
I love that. So Ron, in your work, I just want to make sure I get this. I want to make sure I'm hearing this because I think it's powerful. When you coach all these people, whatever, would you say that most people really don't think much about legacy?
Until it's too late.
Until it's too late. Yeah. Okay.
And I would also say it's never too early to start.
Right.
I would say if you got 25 years left in the workplace, you're already late, because a legacy is cumulative.
Yeah.
Right. It's not a packaged up bow. Most legacies, I think, are retro engineered.
Oh.
I get to the end of my career, or I get toward the end of my career. I'm going to squeeze in some mentoring now. I'm going to write a book. I'm going to go on I'm going to try and universalize my leadership and go package it up and sell it. I think we're seeing tons of that, right?
Yes.
I think all of that is signs of uncreated legacy. It's neuroticism. It's not, because if you really had a legacy you'd created and built, you'd find a healthy way to share it. You wouldn't feel this compulsive, self-interested, self-indulgent need to broadcast it in a book that nobody wants to read anyway. Or turn yourself into a consultant now or a coach now because you're going to try and take all of your operational wisdom and sell it to other people because you want to monetize it. All that is just people fearing their obsolescence. And they're so terrified of their obsolescence that they're trying to grip to it with all they can. And if your legacy work is triggered, and be honest with yourself, by a sense of fearing your irrelevance, you've already ruined it. Because now your legacy is just self-indulgent. It's all about you.
Right.
So
that's excellent.
Go see a therapist and unwind all that crap before you start doing anything to anybody.
Right. No, that's excellent. I love it. I mean, this is wonderful. Can you share a story that comes to mind, either related to you or related to one of your clients about legacy or someone you know? I mean, someone who's really kind of done it right and what was so right about
I had plenty who did it wrong.
it? I
I mean,
know. Well,
I've
that
so
way
many executives,
from what they don't.
well, I had one leader call me a couple years ago and say the only thing I ever failed at is retirement. They just didn't know what to do with themselves. They had no plan.
Right.
I think so. Yes, there's a guy, a leader that I've worked with. He was in his mid 40s, had risen a ladder, late 40s, and he was a phenomenal leader. He was a very humble guy, very confident guy, had a tremendous committed career, but hadn't really thought about. He thought maybe he wanted to be a CEO of a big public company. Maybe he was on that path, but didn't know what he wanted to do. And so many people just get on the conveyor belt of the rising ladder and don't give a thought to where's this going to end.
Right.
What do you want it to be true when this is over? So we have an activity we do called Stories from the Future.
Okay.
It's an exercise we do with leaders to help them consider, what stories do you want to be true about you in 3, 5, 8 years from now? And so his name was Paul. And so my partner and I worked with him for a year, and we did a whole series called Paul 2.0 to really dig deep and to think about what could the last 15 years of his career look like? What would be a finish line that he'd be proud of? We went and interviewed his school teachers. I spent an hour interviewing his father, which years later, after his father passed away, that interview became sacred because I recorded it.
Yes.
We went interviewed past college roommates, people all throughout his life to see a lifespan integration of what patterns would tell us under what conditions he would thrive. And it was a deeply sobering experience for him and very transformative because it really helped guide the path he went on to later become a wonderful CEO of a very large company. Not the one he was in or that he thought he would get. And it was an odd path to it, but I think ultimately the best path for him. And now he's thriving and he's been thoughtful. And of course, when he got into his job, he was much harder than he thought. It was a turnaround situation. Now he's been in the job 4 years and the company's really thriving and beginning to turn around, which is what he was good at, turning things around. He was at every other assignment he had in that big company where he was at for 22 years. He had to take something that was, a mess and make it better. And he did it on all of them. And he actually liked it. So when he took a turnaround situation that was not so obviously a turnaround, it was no surprise that he dug up all the skeletons, how to figure it out. It was a family-owned company, massive company in the Midwest, and he had to be artful about how he did it. He's impatient by nature. He's very competitive, good-hearted, and good, generous man. But now this new role had to turn him into the leader that company needed to transform it. That's the part he didn't bargain for. But he adapted because he knew from our work together, thinking about his long-term story, that in order to deliver on the story he promised himself and his family and the people around him, he would have to transform himself in order to earn his right to transform that company.
That's a beautiful story. And the work that you went into to interview his father and former teacher, is that something that's common in your work? Do you do that with a lot of people? Or
when we put together our samples, depending on what the unit of diagnosis is, we'll put all kinds of people in the sample if I can get good data.
Uh-huh.
Spouses love talking to us. Kids, so it depends on what perspective I need to make sure I have to get a good diagnosis of the situation or the leader.
Yeah.
In this case, I needed a picture of his life. I needed to understand who he had formed to be. He grew up at a young age. His mother died of cancer when he was in high school, and she hung on for years till he graduated high school. So he saw resilience and persistence and fighting, which is which I don't think he ever realized formed a big part of who he was. So I needed to understand his whole story. We needed to know a full picture of him to be able to do a Paul 2.0 look at his life. It wasn't just going to be enough to get a current state view of the leaders around him. So that's why we went back that far.
No.
It depends on what we're trying to understand.
Well, that's excellent, Ron. Wow, I love that story. How do you think people might change their perception of legacy given what we've been living in and working in with COVID-19?
I hope for the better. I mean, we're seeing everybody's been confronted with their own mortality.
Yeah.
Where life's more fragile. I mean, we all know life's fragile. Don't waste it. We all know the cliches and the bumper stickers and the
Right.
texts.
Yes.
Now we're seeing it, and I do hope that people step back and I mean, these crises have ways of instantly prioritizing your life,
Yes.
right? The way a car accident or a sudden death or a stage 4 diagnosis.
Yeah.
A stage 4 diagnosis instantly reorganizes your life.
Yeah.
Well, I hope for some people this did that, because you will leave a legacy. That you will leave one. The question is, are you deciding what that is? And if you're not, and it's being decided by default, you should never assume it's a good one.
Right. That's excellent. Yeah. No, you're right. It helps put life in, definitely prioritize life instantly. Well, Ron, what else should I have asked you that people listening, watching need to know? I mean, what should I have asked you that I didn't, and that you want to share, that you think is we need to know this? Yeah.
I don't know that I have anything that profound to say, but given that your topic is about legacy, and so I imagine there'll be people who are listening to this who are wondering about, was my time on the planet worth it?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the painful question we all ask is, gosh, if I disappeared tomorrow, would anybody know or care? And I don't want anybody asking that question because the answer is always yes. But legacy is not something that happens at the end of your career.
Right.
Legacy is something you have to earn every day.
Uh-huh.
You can't sort of go. I'm a good person. I'm a kind person. I do a hard job. I work hard. I learn a lot, and all that's going to add up in 30 years to a good legacy. That's not how it works. Legacy is a daily. I think it should be a noun, a verb. It should be I'm going to legacy today. It should be every day you have the opportunity to leave the world better for somebody than you found it. Every person that crosses your path, every decision you make, every meeting you host, every meal you share is an opportunity to leave a mark on the world that's better. And if you are intentional about understanding that and being a good steward of those privileges, especially if you're a leader who leads people, controls budgets, shapes careers, you understand the incredible power of what you're able to do with that influence, and every day hold up a yardstick to say, did I leave the world better for somebody today? That's legacy. Then you won't end up at the end of your career wondering, what the heck was I here for? Or was it all worth it?
Right.
But if you think that legacy is about the cumulative sum total of everything you did, hopefully more in the black than the red, that's a really bad and faulty gauge to wait to see.
Wow. Yeah, that's excellent. Wow, Ron, thank you. Well, anything else? Because this is so powerful, I don't want it to end. Anything else you want to say about your work? Or
if your listeners want to stay in touch, come find me at navalent.com, navalent.com. We've got a free ebook at navalent.com/transformation, which I'm sure Maria's downloaded a million times. Twitter, email, LinkedIn, stay in touch.
Okay. Well, Ron, thank you very much. I mean, the emphasis in my work is, may the rest of life be the best of life. And so may the rest be the best for you.
Thanks, Jann, so much. I appreciate you having me, and best of luck on your series.
Thank you very much.